Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, June 30th, 2021. Today is Saturday, June 26th, 2021, and we've had a full week. We did Vacation Bible School this week and had 20 children enrolled and that came. Had pretty good participation. We had a different format than we've ever had before, a one-room Vacation Bible School, and we had everybody in one room in the sanctuary, and music, and then the Bible study, and then we'd go outside and recreation, back in snacks, and and it flowed pretty well. For first year back after the pandemic, I thought we were doing good, and the children seemed to have a great time. Zeke and I did a lot of walking because I took the week off, and so I had a lot of time in the morning. I think the longest walk we'd ever did was 6.3 miles. For that kind of thing, fairly short. But he thought it was hot and humid. It was fairly humid, and but we got lots of miles in and enjoyed each other's company. Threw the toy in the backyard for him a whole lot, and him and Penny got a lot of running in as Penny tries to play stalk the German Shepherd, and as he's chasing his toy, and we had a lot of fun. And I'm well on way to finishing my walking miles for the month. I've actually finished my normal walking area, and then on Friday got to do an extension walk that I've been meaning to do since basically Christmas. Day after Christmas or Christmas, something like that. I tried to get this road. It's right outside my normal walking area, but it's clearly rural, and it is amazingly dirty considering that how little traffic it gets. And then several times in January, February, March, I would also try to get it, and never got completely down the road. And each time learned more about how to get it done, and picked up more and more litter. And so Friday, we took 4 hours and picked up 2 full recycle bins full of recycles, a full black trash bag full of trash, probably a bin and a half of aluminum cans, and shredded aluminum from them mowing over them, and got it all done, and feel somewhat accomplished. Then I worked a full day today. I do try to make sure that I keep up my promise that I will do my share of weekend work and always work Saturday unless there's an extenuating circumstance. And since then, I've only missed a handful of times, or maybe double handful of times, in 7 or 8 years of working weekends. That allows me off on Sunday, and I definitely want people to think that I'm being a responsible worker. And they enjoy always having Saturday off, and I enjoy always having Sunday and Monday off. And Monday, Zeke and I get to do another long walk. Did have a good set of walk this week, and get to finish the month out strong. Tonight we are dealing with Joshua, and we're in chapter 20. We're going to be dealing with the cities of refuge and why they're important. And I'm also hoping to get to the towns of the Levites, related topic, and cover chapter 21 also. We'll see how far I get. Then we just have 1 or 2 more weeks after this, and then we'll start Judges. And I'm already thoroughly enjoying my study of Judges to preparation for the Bible study. So let's start with chapter 20, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. When he flees to one of these cities, he is to stand in the entrance of the city gate and state his case before the elders of that city. Then they are to admit him into their city and give him a place to live with them. If the avenger of blood pursues him, they must not surrender the one accused because he killed his neighbor unintentionally and without malice aforethought. He is to stay in that city until he has stood trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest who is serving at that time. Then he may go back to his own home in the town from which he fled. So let's talk about what this cities of refuge is. This is basically for negligent homicide, accidental death, things like that. It's not for murder. And their society of justice was much different than ours. If you basically everything was a lawsuit. We've talked about that with the Romans. That was formal with them. With the Israelites, there was no court system. You literally, if you had something against somebody, went to the closest city gate or city square or wherever in that city the elders convened. And the elders was not a formal group in most communities. It was just the old men that were too old to go out and do work in the field and to do their normal occupation, and they would sit where they were publicly available, and if you had something that you needed a judgment on, they were supposed to be old enough and wise enough to figure out what happened, and the consensus of the group passed sentence. If they couldn't figure it out, then they passed it up to Levites, who, if they couldn't figure it out, would pass it up to the priest. And ultimately, if the priest couldn't decide it, then they would pass it up to the high priest, who, if he couldn't decide it, he would consult the Lord and use the Urim and Thummim to determine how to decide the case. And but most cases were handled on the local level. You didn't have to appeal up much. Most cases were handled at the local level. If it was something very important, the elders might call some other people present to hear the whole case. And then if it was a case that the community needed to kill somebody, they stoned them to death. If it was not a case where the Mosaic Law said to stone them, then every clan had somebody in it who was basically a defender for the clan, and it was their job to kill the murderer. And so, and basically most trials were clan against clan. Or clan against somebody from within the clan or somebody from a different clan. And the elders that sat at the city gate would then decide the innocence or guilt. And then the Avenger of Blood, the person appointed from that clan to kill in that clan's name, would execute the sentence. If they determined that the person was innocent, they could be let go, and the Avenger of Blood was not supposed to touch them. If, on the other hand, the person who the clan thought was guilty chose not to defend himself before the elders, the Avenger of Blood could just find him and kill him. Because assumed that if you didn't defend yourself, you were automatically guilty. Sometimes the Avengers of Blood system ended up being just a low-level blood feud. One soldier from each side going out and knocking somebody off, and then somebody from the other side killing the Avenger of Blood, and then that clan would go atone for their Avenger of Blood getting killed, and it because the system of law is very slack or very lax, not a very efficient system. Uh, but on the other hand, since most everything was decided essentially by community gossip line, um, it was sufficient for a clannish society. Um, and very often the leaders of the clan, if they didn't think there was guilt, would tell the Avenger of Blood not to go hunt them down and kill them, that they would take care of it through other means and find the evidence and then present them at the city gate. If, on the other hand, you knew you had killed somebody and you know you didn't do it intentionally, it was an accident, then the Avenger of Blood could just come and kill you. If it was well known you killed somebody, and nobody would consider the Avenger of Blood guilty of murder. If you know it was innocent and you were not guilty of murder, the purpose of the City of Refuge is you could run there and you weren't put on trial with the locals who might be contaminated with the local gossip and what people thought. You would go to this neutral city, and it was supposed to be well within just a few days' journey, so that anybody, particularly if they were scared for their life, could get there before the Avenger of Blood caught up with them. And then they were to stand at that city gate among strangers and say, I accidentally killed somebody, here's my evidence that it happened. And the elders at that city gate of these cities of refuge would hear the one-sided evidence, and if they were convinced it was likely that you were innocent from your testimony, at least worth investigating with the trial, they would put you up in their town, give you an apartment to live in, a house to live in, and an occupation to do. Now, you couldn't leave the city. You had to stay there, but they wouldn't let the Avenger of Blood in to kill you. And so it afforded you protection, and then when the Avenger of Blood came, he would come with evidence that said, this guy committed murder, here's the evidence that it was murder, not just an accident. And then the elders of that city would then convene a real court, and since they were cities of refuge, they heard a lot more murder cases than the average court did, and they would determine on a more formal basis whether you had accidentally killed somebody or intentionally killed somebody. Now, if they determined you were guilty of murder, you would be handed over to the Avenger of Blood right then at the end of the trial, and he would execute you, and it would be over. On the other hand, if they determined you were innocent, they would pronounce your innocence and send the Avenger of Blood back home. Now, the thing is, there was still a penalty for having killed somebody, even if it was accidental, even if it's unintentional, even if you didn't mean to. And one of the cases that we know from the time of the judges that got preserved in oral tradition, somebody built a house. They had built the flat roofs like they tended to in that society so that you could, when it's hot, you could sleep out on the top at night when it cooled off, so you could sleep in the relatively cool, and the house would still be hot, but you could sleep upstairs. And, well, they didn't build a railing around the outside of the flat roof, and somebody went up there and fell off and died. The owner of the home had killed somebody. Not intentionally. He wasn't even present when they died. But by not putting up proper safety equipment and making it hard to fall off the roof, he killed somebody. Well, when he found out they had died and the Avenger of Blood was coming after him because the relative had died, he ran to a city of refuge. They determined that he had not intentionally killed the person, and then he got to stay in the city of refuge. Now, the thing is, there was a penalty for having killed somebody. You couldn't just go off scot-free. You were innocent, and you could go back to your livelihood. The penalty was you had to stay in the city of refuge until the high priest died. And news of the high priest got to the city of refuge, and ideally back to your hometown too. It was also prudent if the high priest was old and going to die soon, you might just conveniently stay in the city of refuge if it was real soon after it happened, because the Avenger of Blood might still be mad at you. You might wait for the next high priest to die. But, how long could that be? Well, it could be quite a while. I mean, Eli lived to be 99. He became high priest in his 20s, I think it was. You could have been in a city of refuge for 70 or more years sometime. That it was an indeterminate period of time. And then once the high priest died, then you could leave the city of refuge. Now, if you left the city of refuge and they were all walled cities, so there was a definite border to them. If you even went out the city gate onto the road in front of the city and the Avenger of Blood found you and killed you, he was innocent of murder. He was just doing his job. You could not leave the city of refuge. You could not go outside the city walls to go farm. You had to change occupations for most people because most people were farmers. And you had to find something to do in the city of refuge that could earn enough money that you could buy the goods it took from people who could leave the city. Or you had to find somebody that would give you a job within the city of refuge. A serious penalty. And you couldn't go visit your relatives. Your dad's having a birthday party, big celebration, it's their 50th wedding anniversary. Yeah, sorry, you can't go. If your relatives don't come see you, you don't get to see them anymore. Pretty serious penalties, really. You were no longer, part of the community you used to be part of. You had to be part of the new community. Then, when the high priest died, then you had this opportunity to go back home. And, the politics of that were also a little sticky. Sometimes, if it had just been a few months, it probably wasn't wise to go back home yet. Let things die down a while. And, if you have to wait till the next high priest dies, that may be 20 years. But anyway, then when your sentence is over and you can go back home, you can go back to your city where you were and resume your life. But let me put it this way. The family did not stand around and wait for you. They moved on with life. Very often wives were treated like widows or told, go live with him. Children could move to the city of refuge with you if they were young, but, you didn't have to support more people. And so this is what they're setting up to do, is set up the cities of refuge and set them up fairly equally distant to the land, so it didn't take long to travel there. Um, it, it was a system of justice when most justice was done by the local family group, the clan, uh, or sometimes the tribal level. Uh, and if you needed outside justice, this was, where you went basically. And so they needed to be reasonably close. They needed to be spread out. They needed to be available to everybody, regardless of where. You didn't need to travel for weeks and weeks to get there. So you didn't need just one city of refuge. You needed, them spread out. And so this is the appointments that they're doing. Verse 7. So they set apart Kadesh in Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali, Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. On the east side of the Jordan of Jericho, they designated Bezar in the desert on the plateau in the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead in the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan for the tribe of Manasseh. Any of the Israelites or any alien living among them who killed someone accidentally could flee to these designated cities and not be killed by the avenger of blood prior to standing trial before the assembly. And if you look at a map, these are spread out. There's one in the north, and it's kind of central in the north part. There's one in the south, and it's central in the south part. And then there's one about halfway in between, and that's on the west side of the Jordan. On the east side of the Jordan, the territory is a little bit smaller, but harder to travel through. And each of these cities, by the way, was on a major road. So you could travel fairly easily to get to them. But the travel was harder on the east side. It was hillier, more ravines, fewer places to stop, and not as good a places to stop. And the road wound back and forth a whole lot more. And so travel time about equally far apart. And again, one at the north end, one at the south end, and one in the middle. And so they spread them out fairly equally. The distance east to west between the cities was fairly uniform also. So it wasn't like you could be too far north or south or east or west. If you were at the Jordan, you could pick which was the closest city or the fastest to travel to or whatever. The idea is you'd go the closest one. It was very often viewed with suspicion you were trying to escape something if you traveled to one further away, because that indicated you trying to flee away from a situation. So they set them up. They picked cities of refuge and designated them so. Okay, we've got plenty of time to get chapter 21. Chapter 21, this is about giving the Levites towns. They were to keep up with the tabernacle, but they also needed places to live and ability to support themselves. And the priest would get their income from the tabernacle and from serving in the tabernacle. But the Levites, they needed to be able to raise sheep and everything else that the Levites had to do, and raise flax and raise wool and cotton, whatever else, to repair the tabernacle. So they had to have some places to live with fields around it, farms around it, so they could do their job. And so they were to be given cities. Chapter 21, verse 1. Now the family heads of the Levites approached Eleazar the priest, Joshua the son of Nun, and the heads of the other tribal families of Israel in Shiloh in Canaan, and said to them, The Lord commanded through Moses that you give us towns to live in with pasture lands for our livestock. So as the Lord had commanded, the Israelites gave the Levites the following towns and pasture lands out of their own inheritance. The first lot came out for the Kohathites, clan by clan. The Levites, who were descendants of Aaron the priest, were allotted 13 towns from the tribes of Judah, Simon, and Benjamin. The rest of Kohath's descendants were allotted 10 towns from the clans of the tribes of Ephraim, Dan, and half of Manasseh. The descendants of Gershom were allotted 13 towns from the clans of the tribes of Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and half-tribe of Manasseh in Bashan. The descendants of Merari, clan by clan, received 12 towns from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. So the Israelites allotted to the Levites these towns and their pasture lands as the Lord had commanded through Moses. The purpose of this was to give them a place to live, but also to spread them throughout the country, and so that the people would have somebody to teach them the law that was local. If they had to travel to Shiloh, to where the tabernacle was, and then later to Jerusalem when the temple was built there, a lot of people just wouldn't be educated by the law, and therefore they would do whatever they felt like, and they wouldn't learn the law, and the Levites spread out through the community. They were supposed to not only take care of the tabernacle, but teach the people the law. And they were also to act as judges. If the locals couldn't decide the case, didn't understand what the law was, they would bring it to a Levite, and the Levite would pass judgment based on the fact that he knew the law better than they did, the law of Moses, that is. And he would also supposed to keep up with, essentially case law of what other cases were decided, so that, if somebody else had decided something similar, he could know, hey, this is what's already been decided is the right way to handle this, so we handle it this way, even if the locals hadn't heard of it. And so they were to be spread out all over the place. And they were assigned randomly, but there was long-term consequences to this. The descendants of Aaron, the priest, they knew the law better than anybody else. They worked in the tabernacle on a routine basis. They had different orders, and they went in and served for a period of time. The high priest served there all the time, but the other priests came in and helped him on a rotating basis. They constantly studied the law. I mean, they essentially read it weekly and kept up with it and memorized it, and they were the ones that were supposed to teach the Levites, who would then go out and teach the people. And the priests, therefore, knew the law best. And they ended up in the south end of the country, around the area that had Jerusalem in it. And so consequently, the people down there obeyed the law better, knew it better, observed it better, and were more dedicated to God than the others. The band just north of where the priests got towns had the closer relatives to the priest that were Kohathites, just like the priests were, but they weren't descendants of Aaron. They were descendants of his relatives, and including Moses' sons. And they were also living in the area where Shiloh was. So they also knew the law fairly well and taught it well, and the people obeyed it better there. Their territory was also the one that was least attacked by outsiders, and so they had less outside influence and less raids and everything like that, and felt less need to compromise with outside people. And so they also obeyed the law well. And the two territories we just mentioned becomes the nation of Judah because they followed God better. So it has a long-term consequence. The other tribes had the other two clans within the Levites that were sons of Levi, his other two sons. They Their job in the tabernacle was more mundane and less. Um, well, as long as the tabernacle was in the desert, they were to haul the less holy things, the outer walls and the big stuff and the equipment that it took to keep the tabernacle going. They had less of a job once it was set up permanently. And uh, the uh, priest and the Kohathites, they had the duty of taking care of the holy things, the very holiest things, the altar and the Holy of Holies and the um, incense altar and the um, utensils for all those, and the mercy seat sitting on the um, uh, Ark of the Covenant. And so they dealt with holy things more and consequently were more attuned to what God wanted. The other two groups, once the tabernacle doesn't move anymore, they really don't have a job. Their job was to pick up and pack up the big heavy stuff and carry it around. If it doesn't carry around, what do they do? Well, it's not till Solomon builds the temple. Well, David kind of set their role of you're going to help the temple slaves get water and um, uh, wood, and you're going to make sure there's animals for sacrifice, and you're going to repair uh, stone once the temple's built, and things like that. He formalized their role as repairmen for the temple, and even before it's built, and had them repairing what little bit of tabernacle there was left then. But for 400 years, they essentially had no formal role. And so they didn't feel an incentive to know the law well and to teach people well. Now, the ones up in the far north in Dan, they acquired a reputation for being good judges and being able to make sound decisions, as some of the people in Dan themselves did. And so, for a significant period of time in the Judges, they were where you went for a kind of a fairest judgment before you went to Shiloh to the high priest, if it was a hard to decide case. And they kept up with case law there. But case law slowly deteriorated to where it was we do what we feel like and what we think is fair, and they weren't consulting with the Mosaic Law much anymore. And that had consequences too when the 10 northern tribes split off to become Israel, the northern kingdom. They set up to be the administrative judicial branch for that kingdom, but they had already adopted a great deal of idol worship, and then Jeroboam, son of Nebat, the first king, he set up false idols, and one of them was in Dan, and they became the priest for this false idol, and therefore, got to rewrite the law in their own image, and this caused all kinds of problems, and it introduced all kinds of pagan practices into the northern kingdom. And because they weren't well versed in the law, they didn't understand why this was a problem. They didn't understand the downfall they were giving their people by not being correct in making fair judgments according to what God had told him to do. And so it ended up being destruction of the northern kingdom and essentially everybody that lived there. Anybody that survived the destruction of the northern kingdom only survived because they happened to be in Judah when it was destroyed. And they ended up moving down there and staying in the southern kingdom. And so whole tribes were essentially wiped out then. So this has long-term consequences, the division, by putting people together close instead of spreading the priest out throughout the whole land. And if they'd done it differently, it might have affected the long-term consequences of the nation. It might have not have divided them. They might have taught the law better, and the people would have been more united and more following God. But because they didn't, it ended up dividing the country into a more law-abiding and a less law-abiding pieces. And that had consequences as the less law-abiding invited foreign practices in and disobeyed God more and more until God said, done with you. We're going to wipe you out. And so, we already see the seeds for this division of land that we're not going to get until 1 Kings being sown. In where do we get the priest their land, their cities? Verse 9. From the tribe of Judah and Simon, they allotted the following towns by name. These towns were assigned to the descendants of Aaron, who were from the Kohathite clans of the Levites, because the first lot fell to them. They gave them Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron. That's one of the cities of refuge. It becomes a priestly city, with its surrounding pasture lands in the hill country of Judah. Arba was the forefather of Anak. But the fields and villages around the city they had given to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, as his possession. In other words, Caleb. Caleb that said, hey, spied that land out and said, hey, it's good land, you got to go take it. Well, it became his. Because he did. Now, they gave Hebron to the priest, but the surrounding lands were his. So the descendants of Aaron, the priest, they gave Hebron a city of refuge for one accused of murder, Libnah, Jeter, Eshtemoa, Helon, Debar, Ain, Jutah, Beth Shemesh, together with their pasture lands, 9 towns from these 2 tribes. And from the tribe of Benjamin they gave Gibeon, Geba, Anathoth, and Almon, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. And Anathoth became known as a priestly town, and it's important later as it is the city of priests that Saul slaughters, because one of the priests from there gave David rations when David was running from Saul. And the few priests that survived ended up being David's priest. And because they were faithful to God, they ended up being the high priest after the death of all of Eli's sons and grandsons. Eli and his sons should have been high priests, but God wiped them out because they were evil men. And there was a time in which Israel had no high priest. And David basically elevated the few survivors of Anathoth because they were not killed by Saul. And they were loyal to him, and he was loyal to them because he was protecting them from Saul, who wanted to slaughter them too. And so, this has consequences. Uh, verse, uh, verse 19. All the towns of the priests, the descendants of Aaron, were 13 together with their pasture lands. The rest of the Kohathite clans of the Levites were allotted towns from the tribe of Ephraim. In the hill country of Ephraim, they were given Shechem, a city of refuge for one accused of murder, and Gezer, Kibziam, and Beth Horon, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. Also from the tribe of Dan, they received Eltekah, Gibbethon, Ajalon, and Gath Rimmon, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. From the half-tribe of Manasseh, they received Taanach, Gath Rimmon, together with their pasture lands, 2 towns. Now there's 2 towns with the same name, Gath Rimmon, given to these Levites. The thing is, we know these towns were different towns because one of them was east of the Jordan, one of them was west of the Jordan. So there was multiple towns that had same or similar name, and then when the Israelites took them over and transliterated them into their own language, they ended up with the same name. A lot of that history has been lost of why these were that way. May have been lost in the conquest of the land. The Israelites may not have known it, just adopted the place names that were there and translated them into their language and went on. Verse 26, all these 10 towns and their pasture lands were given to the rest of the Kohathite clans. 27. The Levite clans of the Gershonites were given from the half-tribe of Manasseh, Golan and Bashan, a city of refuge for one accused of murder, and Beeshtarah, together with their pasture lands, 2 towns. From the tribe of Issachar, Kishion, Deberath, Jarmoth, and En-Ganim, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. And from the tribe of Asher, Mishal, Ebdon, Helkath, and Rehab, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. From the tribe of Naphtali, Kadesh in Galilee, a city of refuge for one accused of murder, Hemandor and Kartan, together with their pasture lands, 3 towns. All the towns of the Gershonite clans were 13, together with their pasture lands. The Merarite clans, the rest of the Levites, were given from the tribe of Zebulun, Jokneam, Kartah, Dimnah, Nahalal, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. From the tribe of Reuben, Bezer, Jahaz, Sedamoth, Mephaathah, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns. From the tribe of Gad, Ramon in Galeed, a city of refuge for one accused of murder, Mahanaim, Heshbon, and Jazer, together with their pasture lands, 4 towns in all. All the towns allotted to the Merarite clans, who were the rest of the Levites, were 12. The towns of the Levites in the territory held by the Israelites were 48 in all, together with their pasture lands. Each of these towns had pasture lands surrounding it. This was true for all these towns. And it's important so that the pasture lands around the town were given to the Levites because they had animals that had to graze. And these were, commons for the city. And so some of them were walled cities, some of them were just villages unwalled. And then there was a surrounding distance around that was essentially the possession of that city, that town. And those pasture lands were then given to the Levites also. so they could pasture their flocks. Um, the Levites apparently did not ever plant and harvest crops. They were keepers of animals. Um, some of the other Israelites became farmers and did more than just being herders of animals. Uh, to those sections, to those people, they divided up the land, and this plot of land is where you can farm, and your brother has this plot of land, and he can farm there. The Levites apparently never did that. Verse 43. So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their forefathers, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their forefathers. Not one of their enemies withstood them. The Lord handed all their enemies over to them. Not one of all the Lord's good promises to the house of Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. It's important to note they succeeded. Um, there was still unconquered land that needed to be taken. We'll deal with that somewhat at the beginning of Judges. There are several instances of the different tribes going up and taking pieces of land that were rightfully theirs according to the Lord and had not yet been taken. And as they grew more numerous, they did so and they cleared out. But they had the basics of the land done. And nobody was attacking them. If there were refugees, they weren't trying to band together and get their cities back. They were just trying to save their necks. And their influence would come later when the Israelites did not wipe them out. But the land got a rest from war. No one on any side was attacking them. Egypt wasn't attacking from the south. The Hittites weren't attacking from the north. The Edomites and Moabites weren't attacking from the east. Of course, Mediterranean Sea was not going to attack. The Philistines to the south were not organized enough yet to attack. We'll kind of get to that in Judges. Some of the other peoples had remnants left in the land, but they were not organized. So, they have peace all around. If they'd been diligent at this point to, yes, we need to farm, we need to raise our animals, we need to repair the towns we've attacked and build up our population and then go out and conquer. And if it had a second wave of conquering soon after this, the next generation or so, they could have secured their land and freed themselves from a lot of bondage that they got into because they started following the gods around them. But they didn't. They got fat and content with, we've got ours, and we've got some neighbors that don't believe in Yahweh, but we can trade with them and marry their daughters, and they can marry our sons, and they can marry our daughters, and we can live together in peace. No, you shouldn't have done that. God told you not to, and that sets up the problem later. But at this point in time, nobody's attacking them. They have peace. They have the great outlines of the land that God had promised them. There are pockets that have foreigners in it, but it's just small pockets at this point in time. And they could have finished the job off, and could have finished it off within a generation. Did not. And that's going to cause problems. But right now, they can look at things and say, God has fulfilled his promise. But part of the promise that God had said is, if you don't obey everything I said, and you leave little gaps, it will become a thorn to you, and eventually it will cause you to fail. And because they left the little gaps and compromised in what they thought were little ways that didn't matter, a generation or two later, it matters a great deal. So, be uncompromising in your faith to Jesus today, in your generation. Don't let little things build up, because if so, the next generation will take your example, and that will be their norm, and they'll compromise in other little ways, and things will get worse. Every generation has to make that choice to live uncompromisingly for God. And they had God's promises fulfilled in their generation, and promises that had been made all the way from Abraham's time to the present day, and they saw it fulfilled, and they weren't totally faithful. Gracious Lord, have us to be faithful to you. Have us to not compromise. Have us to continually turn in repentance. That when you convict us with your Holy Spirit of truth and righteousness, we will be humble before you, not stiff-necked, not resistant, but we will obey you and do exactly what you tell us to do. That we won't compromise in little ways. That we won't leave little pockets of sin here, there, and yonder. But we will eradicate them and live pure and holy lives before you. Lord, thank you for being a God that fulfills your promises, that you set up a system of justice so that justice would serve in the land, and that people would have your law taught to them all over the countryside, and that you would provide for all of your people, not just the 12 tribes, but the tribe of Levi and all its clans, and the priest. And Lord, you fulfilled your promises to that generation. Lord, you do continue to fulfill your promises even today. You are a great and mighty God. You are worthy of all praise and worship. Have us to worship you. Have us to praise you. Have us to teach your law, teach your way to others. In your gracious name, amen. And I hope to see you Wednesday at church. And if not, I'll see you here online next week. Have a good week.